Little prime for a good time. I've got a little story for you. So, if you saw the last video, you see that I was having problems getting this thing going. And I was thinking it was a compression issue. Well, one of you actually had it right in the comments. I came out to this thing one day, probably about a month after I'd been working on this thing. Come out, tinker, push some gas into it, try and get it to start. And I kept thinking, well, maybe it's a compression issue. Well, one day it was really hot. So I came out here and thought, well, if it's hotter, probably have a little bit better chance of getting this thing started. Maybe a little hotter outside, maybe a little more compression. And when I was trying to start it, I've got one of the boots off down here for the parking brake. Well, I could see through the floor, in fact I can look down and see it right now, where the Y pipe comes off the engine for the exhaust, and I'm cranking it, and it's not popping, and then finally, big old flame comes out of that, and I can see it through the floor, comes out of the Y pipe. And I thought, that's kind of weird. I mean, I actually looked up at one point what's going to cause backfires, and one can be too much fuel, or timing is another problem. So I thought, well, if we're getting fire coming out of the exhaust, that could possibly mean that the timing is too far advanced. Alright, so, or I should say not advanced, it's too far retarded, so after the piston's going up compression and we're on the exhaust stroke, getting the fire around that point, which is going to push that fire out the exhaust valve manifold and then out the exhaust. So, I went underneath, or I should say I went under the hood, and I took all the spark plugs off of the distributor and just moved them back one, which would advance the timing, and here's what happened. You want to hear it run? Yeah, me too. Give it a little prime for a good time. Alright, try that. Size. Well, I don't know.
It's alive!
Works. So what you actually saw was the second time it actually ran. The first time I couldn't believe it was going to start, or that it did start, and I was like, oh my gosh, I got to get the camera, and then we filmed that second start. So, but this thing will start and run. I tried hooking gas up to the carburetor, and something's wrong with the carburetor. It probably needs to be cleaned. I mean, it's been sitting for 10, 20 years, who knows how long, so that's got to come off, probably take off the fuel pump and replace it. Who knows how bad the diaphragm is. Probably hook gas up to that, and then maybe pull the tank off and see how that looks on the inside. But this will start, and I'll show you this. That's another issue too, is the clutch is still engaged. I thought if we got it to run, maybe we can get it to loosen up, but I tried adjusting the clutch, but one of the fingers, I don't know if it's rusted or whatever, but one will get pushed and the other one barely gets pushed when the throwout bearing touches it. So maybe the trans has to come out, maybe we can play with it some more and get it freed up. I'm not sure, but this is what it'll do. So it runs until it runs out of gas. That was me dumping gas down the carburetor. Oil pressure comes up on the gauge, and that's that. One final note. Alright, I don't know a lot about these engines and working on old stuff like this, but something I did and something just about anybody can do is go on the Interscreen and you can learn all kinds of stuff. There's all kinds of people that have had these problems before and people that are willing to help. IH Parts America. Let's see, I got my list down here. Red Power Magazine, Binder Planet. I wasn't quite sure exactly how breaker points worked, so I searched an article and read about that and learned how they work, and got this thing going, or got spark going. And then another thing, when I was getting parts for this, there were all kinds of options for distributor parts, you know, as far as the cap, the rotor, breaker points. IH Parts America, they had on their forum, somebody went through and put together a nice article on the different distributors that were on these 345s, the Scouts and the Lodestars too. It was just great because I was able to narrow down what distributor this had and what parts I needed and easily order them after I was able to identify them. So that's something anybody can do, is go online, do research, and voila, it runs. So stay tuned. We're going to still do some more work on this. It doesn't run very good, obviously, but we're just dumping gas down the carburetor. That might help, actually putting a metered fuel source to it. It's over full on oil right now because I wanted to. When I was trying to get the engine freed up, I overfilled it thinking maybe we'll get some oil passed out of the oil pan into the cylinders or whatever. That might be causing this thing to shake like it does when it runs, because it shakes. But it's pretty sweet that we got it to run, and I was shocked and surprised when we got it to go, and it's back to life.